The wind hit Alara's face like a slap the moment she stepped off the stagecoach. Windfall Ridge wasn't a town. It was a scar on the earth, all crooked storefronts and rotting boardwalks clinging to the side of a mountain that didn't want them there. Dust rolled through the streets in slow, lazy clouds, and somewhere behind the general store, a dog barked once and then gave up. She'd been here before, once, when her father was still alive and still foolish enough to think a handshake meant something. Alara adjusted the worn leather satchel on her shoulder and started walking. Her boots knocked hollow against the boards, and she kept her eyes forward, ignoring the stares that followed her like flies. A woman traveling alone always drew attention. A woman in men's riding clothes, with a rifle slung across her back and dirt under her nails, drew something else entirely. Let them look. The land office sat at the far end of the street, squat and gray, with windows so filthy you couldn't see inside. She pushed through the door, and the smell hit her first. Stale tobacco, old paper, sweat baked into wood. Behind a desk that looked like it had survived a fire sat a man with thinning hair and a mustache that drooped like it was giving up on life. "Help you?" he asked without looking up. "I'm here about the Vance property," Alara said. "My father's debts." That got his attention. He glanced up, eyes flicking over her once, twice, then settling on her face with something that might have been pity. Or amusement. Hard to tell. "You're Samuel Vance's daughter." "I am." He leaned back in his chair, and it groaned under him. "Well, Miss Vance, I'm afraid there's been a development." "What kind of development?" "The kind where your father's debts got sold." Alara's jaw tightened. "Sold to who?" "Victor Hale." The name landed between them like a stone dropped into water. She'd heard it before. Everyone had. Hale owned half the territory, and the half he didn't own yet he was working on. Cattle, timber, water rights. He had his fingers in everything, and they said he never let go once he had a grip. "When?" she asked. 3 weeks ago, right after your father passed. My condolences, by the way." She ignored that. "Where do I find him?" The clerk's eyebrows went up. "You sure you want to do that?" "Where?" He sighed and scratched something onto a scrap of paper, then slid it across the desk. "North end of town. Big house on the hill. Can't miss it." Alara took the paper without a word and walked out. The air outside felt colder now, sharper, like the town itself had shifted while she was inside. She stood on the boardwalk for a moment, looking up toward the hill where a sprawling 2-story house loomed over everything else, dark wood and iron railings gleaming in the afternoon light. Smoke curled from the chimney, slow and deliberate. She started walking. The climb was steep, and by the time she reached the front gate, her legs were burning. 2 men stood on either side of the entrance, both armed, both watching her with the kind of stillness that came from practice. One of them stepped forward. "State your business." "I'm here to see Victor Hale." "He expecting you?" "No." The man looked her over, then glanced at his partner, who shrugged. "Wait here." He disappeared inside, and Alara stood in the cold, her breath fogging in front of her face. She could feel the other guard's eyes on her, but she didn't turn. Didn't give him the satisfaction. 5 minutes later, the door opened again, and the first guard jerked his head. "He'll see you." Inside, the house was all dark wood and thick rugs, the kind of place that swallowed sound. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace big enough to roast a pig, and the walls were lined with mounted heads: elk, deer, a wolf with its teeth bared in a permanent snarl. Victor Hale stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out over the town below. He didn't turn when she walked in. "Miss Vance?" he said, voice smooth as oil. "I was wondering when you'd come." "You bought my father's debts." "I did." "Why?" Now he turned. Hale was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair combed back and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, and when they settled on her, she felt the weight of them. "Because your father owed money he couldn't pay," Hale said, "and I don't like loose ends." "How much?" $4,200. Alara's stomach dropped. She'd known it was bad, but not that bad. Her father had always been a dreamer, always chasing the next big thing, the next piece of land, the next herd that would turn everything around. But $4,200? "I can pay it," she said. Hale smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Can you? I'll sell the cattle, the horses, whatever it takes. And how long will that take? A few months? Maybe less. I don't have a few months, Miss Vance. I have business to attend to, investments to protect. He moved away from the window, circling her like a wolf testing its prey. But I'm a reasonable man. I'm willing to make you an offer. What kind of offer? Marry me. The words hung in the air like smoke. Alara stared at him, certain she'd misheard, but his expression hadn't changed. He was serious. Excuse me? Marry me, Hale repeated, slower this time, like he was explaining something to a child. Your debts disappear. Your land stays in your name. Well, our name. You keep your ranch, your cattle, everything, and I get a wife, a partnership. A partnership, Alara echoed, her voice flat. Exactly. And if I refuse? Hale's smile widened. Then I call in the debts, immediately. And when you can't pay, which you won't, I take the land, the cattle, the house, everything your father built, everything you have left. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. That's not an offer. That's extortion. Call it what you like, but those are your options. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. Think about it, Miss Vance. A woman alone out here. It's dangerous. Accidents happen. Cattle go missing. Fences get cut. Wouldn't you rather have protection? Protection from who? You? He laughed, low and soft. From everyone. This territory doesn't forgive weakness. And a woman running a ranch by herself? That's weakness. Alara's blood was roaring in her ears now, hot and furious, but she kept her voice steady. I'll take my chances. Will you? Yes. Hale studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. Suit yourself. You have 2 weeks to come up with the money. After that, I start taking what's mine. It's not yours. Not yet. She turned and walked toward the door, her legs trembling with rage, with fear, with something she couldn't name. She could feel his eyes on her back, could feel the weight of his smile pressing down like a hand on her neck. Miss Vance? She stopped but didn't turn. You'll be back, Hale said. They always come back. Alara walked out without answering. The ride back to the ranch took 3 hours, and by the time she crested the last hill and saw the buildings spread out below, the sun was sinking behind the mountains, painting everything in shades of rust and shadow. Home, or what was left of it. The house was small, single-story, with a sagging porch and shutters that rattled in the wind. The barn needed new boards, the fence line was half collapsed, and the chicken coop looked like it might blow over in the next storm. Her father had always meant to fix things, always meant to get around to it. Alara swung down from her horse, a gray mare named Ash, and led her toward the barn. The door creaked open, and inside the smell of hay and leather and old wood wrapped around her like a blanket. She unsaddled Ash, brushed her down, and gave her a scoop of oats before heading toward the house. That's when she saw them. Boot prints. Fresh ones. Leading from the fence line to the porch and back again. Alara's hand went to the rifle on her back, pulling it free in one smooth motion. She scanned the yard, the barn, the tree line beyond. Nothing moved, but the tracks were there, clear as day in the dirt. She followed them to the fence and stopped. Cut. 3 sections of wire snipped clean through and left hanging. Her pulse quickened. She turned in a slow circle, eyes sweeping the darkening landscape, looking for movement, for shapes that didn't belong. Still nothing, but the message was clear. He'd already started. Alara walked back to the house, rifle in hand, and pushed the door open. Inside, everything looked the same. Table, chairs, her father's old coat still hanging by the door. But something felt wrong. Off, like the air itself had been disturbed. She moved through the rooms, checking the windows, the back door, the corners where shadows gathered. Nothing. But she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been here, that someone had walked through her home, touched her things, left pieces of themselves behind. On the kitchen table, she found it. A single playing card, the ace of spades. Her stomach twisted. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands. It was old, edges worn, but the message was unmistakable. A warning, a threat, a promise. Alara set the card down and sat heavily in one of the chairs. Her hands were shaking now, and she pressed them flat against the table, forcing herself to breathe. To think, 2 weeks, $4,200, and men already circling like vultures. She couldn't do this alone. She knew that. But who could she trust? Her father had died owing money to half the territory, and the other half wanted nothing to do with her. She had no family left, no allies, no... The door creaked. Alara spun, rifle up, and aimed before she even registered the movement. "Easy," a voice said from the shadows. "It's just me." A man stepped into the lamplight, hands raised. He was lean, wiry, with dark skin and graying hair tied back at the nape of his neck. Diego Serrano, her father's ranch hand, the only one who'd stuck around after the debts started piling up. "Diego," Alara breathed, lowering the rifle. "You scared the hell out of me." "Sorry," Jeffa saw the light and figured you were back. His eyes flicked to the card on the table, then back to her face. "Trouble?" "You could say that." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, and pulled out a chair. "Tell me." So she did. She told him about Hale, about the debts, about the ultimatum, about the boot prints and the cut fence, and the card left behind like a calling card from death itself. Diego listened without interrupting, his face hard as stone. When she finished, he sat back and let out a long, slow breath. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks. And you told him no. Of course I told him no. Diego nodded like he'd expected that. Then he's going to come at you hard. He doesn't like being told no. I know. Do you? Diego leaned forward, elbows on the table. Jeffa, Hale owns this territory, the law, the land, the people. You cross him, you're on your own. I'm already on my own. Not quite. He tapped the table. You still got me. Alara felt something loosen in her chest, just a fraction. Why are you still here, Diego? You could have left months ago. Found work somewhere safer. Could have, he agreed. But your father gave me a job when no one else would. Gave me a place to stay, food to eat, didn't ask questions. I owe him, and now I owe you. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not, but I'm staying anyway. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Diego stood. I'll check the fence line in the morning, see if there's more damage. You should get some sleep. Sleep, Alara repeated, like the word was foreign. Right. He paused at the door. Lock this behind me, and keep that rifle close. I will. He stepped out into the night, and Alara slid the bolt home, the metal clicking into place with a finality that made her chest tighten. She stood there for a moment, listening to the wind rattling the shutters, the creak of the house settling around her. Then she picked up the ace of spades and fed it to the fire. She didn't sleep. Alara lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every sound the night had to offer. The wind, the scratch of branches against the window, the distant howl of a coyote, and underneath it all, the feeling that she was being watched. By the time dawn broke, she was already dressed and moving, boots laced, rifle loaded, coffee boiling on the stove. Diego arrived just as the sun cleared the horizon, his face grim. How bad? She asked. 12 more sections cut, cattle scattered, found tracks heading north. How many men? 4, maybe 5. Alara swore under her breath. They're trying to bleed me dry before the deadline. Looks like it. She poured herself a cup of coffee, the steam curling up into the cold air. We need to round up the cattle, get them back before Hale's men take them. That'll take days, and we're just 2 people. Then we find help. Diego raised an eyebrow. Who's going to help you go up against Victor Hale? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. Jeffa, I'm not giving up, Diego. Not yet. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. Then we start with the cattle. They spent the next 3 days riding the fence line, rounding up strays, patching what they could. It was brutal work, long hours in the saddle, cold nights under the stars, living on jerky and stale bread. But slowly, painfully, they started pulling the herd back together. On the 4th day, they found the first body. It was a steer, throat cut, left in a gully where the buzzards had already started circling. Alara stared down at it, her jaw tight, Her hands curled into fists. They're not even hiding it anymore, Diego said quietly. No, they want me to see it, want me to know what's coming. So what do we do? Alara turned away from the carcass, her eyes scanning the hills around them. We move the herd, tonight. Move them where? Anywhere that's not here. Diego frowned. Jeffa, moving a herd at night is dangerous. We could lose half of them in the dark, and if Hale's men catch us, if we stay here, we lose everything anyway. She looked at him. I'm not sitting around waiting for him to take it all piece by piece. If he wants a fight, I'll give him one, but on my terms. Diego hesitated, then nodded. All right, but we're going to need more than just the two of us. I know. And you still haven't told me where we're going. East, toward the rail line. There's a buyer in Red Bluff. If we can get the herd there, I can sell them, pay off the debts, and tell Hale to go to hell. That's a 4-day drive through open territory with no cover. I know. And Hale's men will see us coming a mile away. I know that too. Diego shook his head. This is insane. You got a better idea? He didn't answer. Then saddle up, Alara said. We leave at dusk. But they started the drive just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky turning from gold to purple to black. The cattle moved slowly at first, confused by the sudden push, but Diego knew how to work them, knew how to keep them calm, keep them moving. Alara rode point, her eyes on the horizon, her rifle across her lap. The night was cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and stayed there, and the stars overhead were sharp and bright, like chips of ice. They made it 2 miles before the first shot rang out. The sound cracked through the darkness, and Alara's horse reared, nearly throwing her. She grabbed the reins, pulling the mare under control, and spun toward the source of the gunfire. 3 riders, maybe 4, coming fast from the west. Diego, she shouted. I see them! The cattle started to panic, breaking formation, scattering in all directions. Alara cursed and spurred her horse forward, trying to cut them off, but another shot rang out, and this time she felt the bullet pass close enough to hear it whistle. She yanked her rifle free and fired back, not aiming, just making noise, letting them know she wasn't defenseless. The riders slowed, circling, and she caught a glimpse of one of them, a broad-shouldered man with a bandana pulled up over his face. Turn back, Miss Vance, he shouted. This is your last warning. Go to hell, she shouted back. He laughed, low and mean, and fired again. This time the bullet hit one of the cattle, and the animal went down hard, legs kicking. The rest of the herd bolted. Diego was already moving, trying to contain the stampede, but it was like trying to hold back a flood with your bare hands. Alara fired again, and one of the riders jerked back, clutching his shoulder. The others wheeled their horses and charged. She didn't think, just moved. Alara spurred her mare forward, directly into their path, rifle raised. The first rider swerved, the second tried to grab her reins, but she swung the rifle like a club, connecting with his jaw. He went down hard, hitting the ground with a sickening thud. The third rider pulled a pistol, but before he could fire, another shot rang out, not from Alara, not from Diego, and the man's hat flew off his head. He cursed and yanked his horse around, fleeing into the darkness. Alara spun, looking for the source of the shot, and saw him. A figure on horseback, silhouetted against the stars. Tall, lean, with a rifle resting across his saddle. He didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there watching. Who the hell are you? Alara called. The figure nudged his horse forward, slow and easy, and as he came into the moonlight, she saw his face, sharp cheekbones, dark eyes, a scar running from his temple to his jaw. He wore a long coat, dusty and worn, and a hat pulled low over his eyes. Name's Rowan Creed, he said, voice rough as gravel. And you just made the dumbest move of your life. Alara kept her rifle trained on the stranger, even as the last of Hale's men disappeared into the darkness. The cattle were still scattered, their panicked bellowing echoing across the valley, and Diego was somewhere out there trying to keep what remained of the herd from running themselves off a cliff. But this man, this Rowan Creed, he just sat there on his horse like he had all the time in the world, like bullets weren't flying 2 minutes ago. You mind explaining that? She demanded. Explaining what? The part where you shot at men I was already handling. Rowan tilted his head, and even in the dim light she could see the corner of his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but close. You were handling them? That what you call getting surrounded by three armed men while your cattle stampede? I had it under control. Sure you did. Her finger tightened on the trigger. You've got about 5 seconds to tell me who you are and what you want before I decide you're with them. Already told you my name. He shifted in his saddle and she noticed the way his hand stayed nowhere near his gun. Deliberate, careful. As for what I want, that's a longer conversation. One we should probably have after you round up what's left of your herd. I don't need your help. Didn't say you did, but Diego does. She glanced toward where Diego had vanished into the darkness, then back at Rowan. How do you know Diego's name? I know a lot of things. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting right now. He gathered his reins. You can stand here pointing that rifle at me all night, or you can go help your ranch hand. Your choice. He was right, and she hated that he was right. Alara lowered the rifle slowly, her jaw tight. If I find out you're working for Hale, I'm not. Then who do you work for? Myself. Everybody works for somebody. Not me. He turned his horse. Come on. Your cattle are heading for that ravine, and if they go over, you can kiss your herd goodbye. Alara swore under her breath and kicked her mare into motion, following him into the darkness. The ground was rough here, all rocks and scrub brush, and she had to trust the horse to find her footing. Ahead, she could hear the cattle, their panicked sounds growing fainter by the second. Rowan rode like he'd been born in the saddle, smooth and efficient, reading the terrain even in the dark. They crested a small rise, and below them Alara could see the herd, maybe 40 head, moving fast toward a line of trees that marked the edge of a steep drop. There, Rowan said, pointing. Diego's trying to turn them, but he needs help on the flank. I see him. They split without another word. Alara angled left, pushing her mare hard, and came up along the edge of the herd. She started shouting, waving her hat, anything to get their attention, to break their momentum. One of the lead steers tried to veer toward the ravine, and she cut in front of it, forcing it back toward the center. Diego appeared on the other side, his horse lathered and breathing hard, and together they started bending the herd, slowly, painfully, away from the edge. Rowan worked the back, keeping the stragglers moving, and after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the cattle began to slow, to mill, to finally stop. Alara slumped in her saddle, her arms shaking from gripping the reins so hard. Her heart was still hammering, and she could taste copper in her mouth from where she'd bitten her cheek. Diego rode over, his face slick with sweat despite the cold. Lost maybe a dozen. Could have been worse. Could have been better. Could have been a lot of things. He glanced past her toward Rowan, who was riding a slow circle around the herd, checking for injuries. Who's your friend? He's not my friend. Says his name's Rowan Creed. Diego's expression changed, went flat and hard in a way that made Alara's stomach tighten. You know him? She asked. I know the name, or I've heard it anyway. He's a tracker, hired gun. Works out of Colorado, mostly. Last I heard he was tracking a gang of train robbers through the Rockies. What's he doing here? Good question. Rowan finished his circuit and rode back toward them, his horse stepping carefully over the rocky ground. Up close, Alara could see more details. The worn leather of his holster, the rifle slung across his back that looked military issue, the way his eyes never stopped moving, cataloging everything. Herd's intact, he said. Couple of the steers are limping, but nothing that won't heal. You lose 12, maybe 13 head. 13, Alara confirmed. Diego says you're a tracker. Among other things. What other things? Whatever pays. He looked at Diego. Been a while, Serrano. Diego's jaw worked. Creed. Didn't expect to see you here. Could say the same. The tension between them was thick enough to cut, and Alara felt like she was missing half the conversation. You two know each other? We've crossed paths, Diego said, his voice carefully neutral. More than crossed, Rowan said. We rode together, once, long time ago. That was a different life. Was it? Yeah, it was. Rowan shrugged, letting it drop, and turned his attention back to Alara. You've got bigger problems than whatever history Diego and I have. Those men who hit you, that wasn't random. I know that. They work for Hale. Some of them, maybe, but not all. Alara frowned. What do you mean? I mean, one of those riders wasn't local. Saw him in town 3 days ago, asking questions. Professional, military bearing. Not the kind of man Hale usually hires for fence cutting and cattle rustling. How do you know what kind of men Hale hires? Because I've been watching him. Why? Rowan hesitated, just for a second, and in that pause, Ilara saw something flicker across his face. Calculation, maybe. Or doubt. Let's just say I have an interest in seeing his operation disrupted. That's not an answer. It's all you're getting tonight. Diego spat into the dirt. You always were good at talking without saying anything. And you always were good at holding grudges. Rowan gathered his reins. Look, we can stand here trading insults, or you can listen to what I came here to tell you, which is that Hale isn't your only problem. Then who is? Man named Rourke, ex-military, works as a mercenary now, mostly enforcement and wet work. Someone hired him, and he's been in the territory for about a week. Ilara's chest tightened. Hired him to do what? Kill you, most likely, or scare you into selling. Hard to say without knowing who's paying him. You think it's Hale? Maybe, but Hale's got his own men. He doesn't need to hire outside muscle unless he's trying to keep his hands clean, which means someone else wants you gone bad enough to pay professional rates. That doesn't make sense. Who else would want my land? That, Rowan said, is what I'm trying to figure out. Diego shook his head. This is insane. Jeffa, we need to get out of here. Take what cattle we have left and run. Run where? Ilara snapped. I run. I lose everything. The land, the herd, all of it. And for what? So I can start over somewhere else with nothing? Better than starting over dead. I'm not running. Then you're a fool. Maybe. But I'm a fool with a herd to move. She looked at Rowan. You said you have an interest in disrupting Hale's operation. Does that interest extend to helping me get these cattle to Red Bluff? Rowan studied her for a long moment. You planning to sell them? That's the idea. And use the money to pay off your debts? Yes. Which means Hale loses his leverage. Exactly. He nodded slowly. All right, I'll ride with you, but only as far as Red Bluff. After that, we're square. We're not square now. I don't even know you. Then consider it an investment. You stay alive, you keep fighting, Hale stays distracted. That works for me. Ilara didn't like it. Didn't like the way he talked around his reasons. Didn't like the way Diego looked at him like he was a snake in the grass. But she needed help, and pride wasn't going to get her cattle to market. Fine, she said, but you step out of line, I'll shoot you myself. Fair enough. They made camp in a shallow draw, sheltered from the wind, with the herd bunched tight and nervous. Diego took the first watch, and Rowan built a small fire, just enough to boil coffee. Ilara sat across from him, her rifle across her knees, watching the way the firelight carved shadows into his face. What happened between you and Diego? She asked. Rowan poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. Ancient history. He doesn't think so. Diego holds on to things, always has. He poured himself a cup. We rode together during the war, same unit. Things went bad, people died, and he blames me for it. Were you to blame? Depends who you ask. I'm asking you. Rowan stared into his coffee. I made a call. It was the right call given the information I had. But people still died, so yeah, maybe I'm to blame. Or maybe the war doesn't change the outcome. Ilara sipped her coffee. It was bitter, too strong, but it cut through the cold. Why are you really here? Told you. I'm tracking someone. Rourke. Among others. And you think he's coming after me? I don't think. I know. Rowan set his cup down. He's been asking questions. About your ranch, your cattle, your debts. He's mapping your routine, your weaknesses. That's what he does. And when he moves, it'll be fast and it'll be final. So why warn me? What do you get out of it? Maybe I just don't like men like Hale or Rourke. Nobody's that altruistic. Rowan smiled, and there was something sad in it. You're right, nobody is. He stood, draining the last of his coffee. Get some sleep. We've got a long day tomorrow. You didn't answer my question. I know. He walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the firelight, and Ilara sat alone staring into the flames. She didn't trust him, couldn't afford to. But she also couldn't afford to turn away help, even if it came wrapped in riddles and scars. Diego returned an hour later and they switched places without speaking. Alara took her rifle and walked the perimeter of the camp, her boots crunching on the frozen ground. The stars were out, cold and distant, and somewhere in the hills a coyote howled. She thought about her father, about the way he'd always believed the next season would be better, the next herd would bring profit, the next rain would save the grass. He'd died believing it, and she'd inherited his debts along with his delusions. But she wasn't her father. She didn't believe in luck or providence or waiting for things to get better. She believed in action, in fighting, in making her own way, even if it meant dragging herself through broken glass to do it. The question was whether that would be enough. They broke camp before dawn, moving the herd slow and steady through the pre-dawn gray. The cattle were tired, skittish, and it took all three of them working in tandem to keep them moving in the right direction. Rowan rode point, Diego took the drag, and Alara worked the flanks, circling back and forth, plugging gaps, keeping the stragglers moving. By midday, her back ached and her legs felt like they'd been beaten with hammers. They stopped to water the herd at a shallow creek, and Alara dismounted, her knees almost buckling when her feet hit the ground. "You all right?" Rowan asked. "Fine." "You don't look fine." "I said I'm fine." He held up his hands. "Just asking." Diego appeared, leading his horse to the creek. "We're making good time. If we keep this pace, we'll hit the halfway point by tomorrow night." "And if Hale's men hit us again?" Alara asked. "Then we fight." "3 against how many?" "Doesn't matter. We don't have a choice." Rowan crouched by the water, filling his canteen. "There's always a choice. Question is whether you're willing to make it." "What's that supposed to mean?" Diego demanded. "Means you could turn back, cut your losses, live to fight another day." "That's not a choice. That's giving up." "Sometimes giving up is the smart play." Diego's hand dropped to his gun. "You calling us stupid?" "I'm calling you realistic, or trying to." Rowan stood, capping his canteen. "You've got a woman who refuses to quit even when she should, a herd that's half the size it needs to be, and enemies on all sides. The odds aren't in your favor." "Since when do you care about odds?" Diego shot back. "I don't, but she should." Rowan nodded toward Alara. "This is her life on the line, not mine, not yours. And if she gets herself killed because she's too stubborn to see reason, that's on her." Alara stepped between them before Diego could respond. "Enough. Both of you." She looked at Rowan. "You're right. The odds aren't good. But they haven't been good since my father died and left me with a mountain of debt and a ranch falling apart. So I'm used to bad odds. And I'm still here. For now. For now is all any of us have." Something shifted in Rowan's expression. Not quite respect, but close. He nodded once and walked back to his horse. Diego waited until he was out of earshot. "I don't like him." "I noticed." "He's dangerous, Jeffa. Not just because he's good with a gun, because he doesn't care about anything. Men like that, they'll burn the world down and walk away whistling." "Maybe. But right now, he's on our side." "Is he?" Alara didn't have an answer for that. They pushed on through the afternoon, the sun climbing high and hot despite the cold air. The land here was open, rolling hills covered in dry grass and scattered juniper, and Alara felt exposed, like a target painted on a blank canvas. Every time she crested a rise, she expected to see riders. Every shadow made her hand drift toward her rifle, but nothing came. By the time the sun started sinking, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, they'd covered another 10 miles. They made camp in a cluster of rocks that offered some cover, and Diego shot a rabbit for dinner. It wasn't much, but it was better than jerky. Rowan cleaned his rifle while the rabbit cooked, his movements methodical and precise. Alara watched him from across the fire, trying to read him, to figure out what he wasn't saying. "You ever been married?" she asked. He looked up, surprised. "That's a hell of a question." "You don't have to answer." "No, never married." Why not?" "Same reason I don't own land or keep a dog. Can't take care of something when you're always moving." "You could stop moving." "Could. But I won't." "Why?" Rowan set the rifle aside. "Because the moment you stop, you start putting down roots, and roots make you vulnerable, make you care about things you can't protect." "Sounds lonely." "It is. But it's also safe. Alara poked at the fire with a stick. Safe from what? Everything. Diego turned the rabbit on the spit. You're full of it, Creed. You're not running from everything. You're running from one thing. You just won't admit it. And what's that? Yourself. Rowan's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, until the rabbit was done and they ate in shifts, watching the darkness press in around them. Alara took the second watch, and she was halfway through when she heard it. A sound, faint, distant, like metal scraping on stone. She stood slowly, rifle in hand, and peered into the darkness. Nothing. But the sound came again, closer this time, and her pulse quickened. "Rowan!" she hissed. He was on his feet in seconds, gun drawn. "What?" "Something's out there." "Where?" "North, maybe 100 yards." He moved to her side, silent as a ghost, and they stood together, listening. The wind had died down, and in the stillness, Alara could hear it clearly now. Footsteps. Careful, deliberate. "Wake Diego," Rowan whispered. "Quiet." She crept back to the fire and shook Diego's shoulder. He came awake instantly, hand on his gun, eyes alert. "Company," she mouthed. He nodded and rolled to his feet, staying low. The three of them fanned out, putting the fire at their backs, weapons ready. The footsteps stopped, then started again, circling. "How many?" Diego whispered. "Can't tell," Rowan said. "At least 2. Could be an animal. Could be, but it wasn't." Alara knew it in her gut. Animals didn't move like that. Didn't circle camps at night with that kind of deliberation. A voice cut through the darkness. Cold. Calm. "Miss Vance, I'd like a word." Alara's blood ran ice cold. She knew that voice, not personally, but she'd heard it described enough times. Smooth, educated, the kind of voice that belonged to a man who'd learned to kill without raising his heartbeat. Rourke. "Show yourself," she called back. "I'd rather not. Makes for poor tactics, stepping into firelight when the other side is armed." "Then what do you want?" "To deliver a message." "From who?" "Does it matter?" "It does to me." There was a pause, then, "Victor Hale sends his regards. He's concerned you might do something reckless, like trying to sell cattle that technically belong to him." "Those cattle are mine." "For another week, perhaps. After that," the voice trailed off, letting the threat hang in the air. "He asked me to encourage you to reconsider his offer. It's generous, really. More generous than you deserve." "Tell Hale he can go to hell." A low chuckle. "I thought you might say that. Which is why I'm here. To provide additional motivation." "What kind of motivation?" "The kind that involves people you care about. Diego Serrano, for instance. Did you know he has a sister in Cheyenne? Married to a blacksmith. 2 children. Sweet family." Diego's breathing changed, went sharp and fast. "You touched them," he started. "I won't touch anyone," Rourke interrupted. "Not if Miss Vance makes the right choice, but if she continues down this path, well, accidents happen, especially to people who can't defend themselves." Alara's hands were shaking now, rage and fear fighting for dominance. "You're a coward, threatening women and children." "I'm practical, and practical men understand leverage." Another pause. "You have until tomorrow night. Turn the herd around, go back to your ranch, and accept Hale's proposal. Do that, and everyone stays safe. Refuse, and I start removing obstacles." "Obstacles," Alara repeated, her voice flat. "You mean people." "I mean whatever stands between my employer and his objectives." Rowan shifted beside her, and she felt rather than saw him raise his rifle. But before he could fire, the voice spoke again, farther away now, already retreating. "Tomorrow night, Miss Vance. Choose wisely." Then silence. They stood there for a long moment, weapons raised, ears straining. But the night had swallowed him, and there was nothing left but the wind and the distant cry of an owl. Diego lowered his gun, his face pale in the firelight. "He knows about Maria." "Who's Maria?" Alara asked. "My sister. He wasn't lying. She's in Cheyenne with her husband and kids." He turned to Alara, and there was something broken in his eyes. "Jeffa, I can't let anything happen to them." "Nothing's going to happen to them." "You don't know that." "I know Rourke's trying to scare us. That's all this is. Intimidation. And if it's not? Diego's voice rose. If he actually goes after them? Then we stop him before he gets the chance. How? We don't even know where he is. Rowan holstered his gun. I do. They both turned to look at him. You know where Rourke is? Alara asked. Not exactly, but I know his pattern. He's not going to Cheyenne. Not yet. That was a bluff. Meant to fracture your group, make you second-guess the drive. How do you know? Because I've tracked him before. He doesn't waste time on secondary targets unless the primary one is already handled. And you're the primary. Diego shook his head. You're guessing. I'm reading the play. It's what I do. Rowan looked at Alara. He'll come at you tomorrow, probably during the drive when you're exposed. He'll try to take you clean, make it look like an accident. Stampede, maybe. Or a fall. Something that gives Hale plausible deniability. So what do? We set a trap, let him think he's got the advantage, then turn it around on him. That's a terrible plan, Diego said. You got a better one? Yeah, turn back, get to safety, warn my sister. Alara stepped in front of him. Diego, listen to me. If we turn back, Rourke wins, Hale wins, and your sister won't be any safer because they'll just use her again the next time I step out of line. The only way to protect her, to protect any of us, is to finish this. Finish it how? By getting yourself killed? By getting those cattle to Red Bluff? By paying off the debt? By taking away their leverage? And if you don't make it, then I don't make it. But at least I went down fighting. Diego's shoulders sagged. He looked old suddenly, worn down by years of bad choices and worse luck. You're as stubborn as your father. I'll take that as a compliment. It's not. But he didn't leave, didn't walk away. And Alara knew in that moment that he'd stay. Not because he believed in the plan, not because he trusted Rowan, but because he was loyal, and loyalty was a chain that bound tighter than any rope. They didn't sleep the rest of the night, just sat around the fire, weapons close, watching the darkness for movement that never came. When dawn finally broke, cold and gray, Alara felt hollowed out, scraped clean of everything except the will to keep moving. They drove the herd hard that day, pushing them faster than was safe, and by late afternoon they'd reached the canyon Rowan had mentioned. It was narrow, steep-walled, with a dry riverbed cutting through the center. The perfect choke point. This is where he'll hit us, Rowan said, staring up at the canyon walls. If I were him, I'd set up on the ridge, wait for the herd to bunch up, then trigger a rock slide. Chaos, confusion, and you're dead in the stampede. Alara studied the terrain. So how do we turn it around? We don't use the canyon. There's no other route. Not that gets us to Red Bluff on time. Then we use it, but we control it. Send the herd through first, without us. We stay back, wait for Rourke to make his move, then we take him. Diego frowned. And if he doesn't make his move? He will. He's got a deadline, same as us. Tomorrow night, he said, which means today's his last chance. Alara looked at the canyon, then at the herd, then back at Rowan. It was a risk, a huge one, but everything about this drive had been a risk, and she was still here. All right, she said, we do it your way. But if this goes wrong, it won't. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll do everything I can to make sure you walk out of this canyon alive. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. They started the herd moving, funneling them into the canyon entrance. The cattle balked at first, sensing danger in the narrow walls and the shadows that clung to the rocks. But Diego rode ahead, calling to them, and slowly they began to move. Alara and Rowan stayed at the rear, watching the ridgeline, waiting. The sun was sinking fast now, throwing long shadows across the canyon floor, and the temperature was dropping. Alara's breath fogged in front of her face, and her hands ached from gripping the reins. There, Rowan said quietly, pointing. She followed his gaze and saw it, a figure on the ridge, barely visible in the fading light, watching. That's him? That's him. What do? We wait. Let him think we don't see him. When he makes his move, we move faster. The herd was halfway through the canyon now, the sound of their hooves echoing off the stone walls. Alara's heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Every second felt like an hour, every breath like her last. Then it happened. A crack like thunder, and suddenly the ridge was sliding, rocks tumbling down in a massive cascade. The cattle screamed and bolted, crashing into each other, and Alara's horse reared, nearly throwing her. "Go!" Rowan shouted, and they spurred forward into the chaos, into the dust and noise and terror. Alara couldn't see, couldn't hear. All she could do was hold on and pray she didn't get trampled. Something hit her leg, hard, and pain shot through her knee. She gasped, but didn't stop, didn't slow. Through the dust, she saw Diego, still ahead, trying to turn the herd. And above, on the ridge, she saw the figure raise a rifle. "Rowan!" she screamed, but he was already moving, his own rifle coming up. The two shots sounded almost as one, and the figure on the ridge jerked back, stumbled, and fell. The rock slide stopped. The cattle kept running, but the worst of it was over. Alara pulled her horse to a stop, gasping, her whole body shaking. Rowan rode up beside her, his face grim. "You hit?" "No, you?" "I'm fine." He looked toward where the figure had fallen. "But we need to check, make sure he's down." They climbed the ridge on foot, weapons drawn, moving carefully over the loose rock. At the top, they found him. Rourke lay on his back, a hole in his chest, blood soaking into the dirt beneath him. His eyes were open, staring at the sky, but there was no life left in them. Alara stared down at him, feeling nothing, no relief, no triumph, just a hollow emptiness. "Is it over?" she asked. Rowan crouched beside the body, checking for a pulse. "For him, yeah, but not for you." "What do you mean?" He pulled a folded paper from Rourke's coat and opened it. His expression darkened. "What is it?" Alara demanded. Rowan handed her the paper. It was a contract, payment terms, and at the bottom, a signature, not Victor Hale's, someone else's, someone she'd never heard of. The name on the contract meant nothing to Alara, J. Thornwell. No first name, just an initial and a surname written in precise, elegant script. But the amount listed beside it made her stomach turn. $5,000. More than her father's entire debt. More than the ranch was worth. "Who the hell is J. Thornwell?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rowan was already searching Rourke's pockets, his movements quick and efficient. "Don't know. But whoever they are, they wanted you dead bad enough to hire the best." He pulled out a leather wallet, flipped it open. No other papers. Nothing personal. Rourke traveled light. Diego appeared at the top of the ridge, breathing hard from the climb. His eyes went to the body, then to the contract in Alara's hand. "What's that?" "Proof that Hale isn't the only one trying to bury me." She handed him the paper. "Ever heard of someone named Thornwell?" Diego scanned the contract, his brow furrowing. "No, but 5,000. He looked up. "Jeffa, that's serious money. That's not just about your land. That's about eliminating a threat." "What threat?" "I'm nobody. I've got a failing ranch and a herd that's barely worth selling." "Maybe it's not about what you have now," Rowan said. "Maybe it's about what you could have, or what you know." "I don't know anything." "Your father might have." Alara's chest tightened. "My father was a dreamer who died in debt. What could he possibly have known that was worth killing over?" "That's the question." Rowan stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "But we're not going to figure it out standing here. We need to move. If Rourke had backup, they'll come looking when he doesn't report in." "You think he had backup?" "Man like that always has backup, insurance, someone watching his back." He started down the ridge. "Come on. We need to get through this canyon before dark." They descended carefully, the loose rock shifting under their boots. By the time they reached the canyon floor, the sun had dropped below the western rim, throwing everything into deep shadow. The herd had scattered during the rock slide, and it took them another hour to round up the stragglers and push them through to the other side. When they finally emerged into open country, Alara felt like she could breathe again. The canyon had been a trap, a killing box, and every instinct she had was screaming at her to put distance between herself and those narrow walls. They made camp in a shallow depression surrounded by sage and rock, building no fire this time. The darkness was complete, moonless, and the stars overhead looked like ice chips scattered across black velvet. Alara sat with her back against a boulder, the contract folded in her pocket, her mind racing. Diego came and sat beside her, his rifle across his knees. You should eat something. Not hungry. You haven't eaten since this morning. I said I'm not hungry. He was quiet for a moment, then, we could still turn back. Take what cattle we have, sell them locally, pay off part of the debt. It wouldn't be everything, but it might be enough to buy time. Time for what? For Thornwell to send another killer? For Hale to tighten the noose? She shook her head. No, we're too far in now. The only way out is forward. Even if it gets you killed? Especially if it gets me killed. At least then I go down trying. That's not comforting. It's not supposed to be. Rowan appeared out of the darkness like a ghost, his footsteps making no sound. Perimeter's clear, no sign of pursuit. Yet, Diego muttered. Yet, Rowan agreed. He settled down across from them, pulling a piece of jerky from his pack. We need to talk about Red Bluff. What about it? Alara asked. You planning to just walk into town, sell your herd, and walk out with a bag of cash? That was the idea. It's a bad idea. Town that size, word travels fast. Hale's got eyes everywhere. The moment you show up with cattle to sell, he'll know, and he'll move to stop it. So what do you suggest? We split up? Diego takes the herd into town, makes the sale, you and I stay back out of sight. Once the money's in hand, we meet up and get out fast. Diego frowned. And if something goes wrong, if Hale's men are waiting, then you improvise. You're good at that. I'm good at staying alive, not the same thing. Close enough, Alara cut in before they could start arguing again. No, we stick together. If we split up, we're vulnerable. Easier to pick off one by one. We're already vulnerable, Rowan said. 3 people against an entire territory. At least this way we've got a chance. A chance at what? At getting Diego killed while we hide in the hills? A chance at finishing what you started. The words landed hard. Alara looked at him, at the way the starlight caught the planes of his face, the scar running along his jaw. He wasn't wrong. She knew that. But the thought of sending Diego in alone, of letting him take that risk while she stayed safe, made her sick. I'll do it, Diego said quietly. They both turned to look at him. I'll take the herd in. Sell it. Bring the money back. He met Alara's eyes. But you need to promise me something. What? If I don't come back, you take that money and you run. Don't try to be a hero. Don't try to save me. Just run. Diego, promise me, Jeffa. She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him that she'd never leave him behind, that they were in this together all the way. But the look in his eyes stopped her. He needed to hear it, needed to know that if things went south, at least she'd survive. I promise, she lied. He nodded, satisfied, and settled back against the rock. Then we've got a plan. They took turns sleeping, 2 hours each, always one person awake and watching. When Alara's turn came, she tried to rest, but her mind wouldn't quiet. She kept seeing Rourke's body, the hole in his chest, the blood soaking into the dirt, kept thinking about the contract, about the name that meant nothing and the money that meant everything. J. Thornwell. Who were they? What did they want? And why did it involve killing her? Her father's face swam up out of memory. Samuel Vance, with his crooked smile and his perpetual optimism, always sure the next season would be better. He'd been a terrible businessman, a worse gambler, and a dreamer to the core. But he'd loved her, loved the land, loved the idea of building something that would last. Had he stumbled onto something, some secret, some piece of information that had gotten him killed? Or was his death just what it looked like? A man worn down by debt and bad luck, his heart giving out in the middle of winter. Alara didn't know, and not knowing was worse than any answer. By the time dawn broke, gray and cold, she was exhausted. They got the herd moving early, pushing them hard, and by midday they could see Red Bluff in the distance. It wasn't much of a town, just a cluster of buildings huddled around a rail depot with a stockyard on the eastern edge. But to Alara, it looked like salvation. They stopped on a ridge overlooking the town, and Rowan pulled out a spyglass, scanning the streets below. Busy, he said after a moment. Lots of activity around the stockyard. Looks like there's an auction today. That's good, Diego said. More buyers means better prices. Also means more witnesses. Harder for Hale to make a move without drawing attention. Or easier, Alara said. Chaos is good cover. Rowan lowered the spyglass. True, but we don't have a choice. We need to sell today. Waiting just gives them more time to set up. They worked out the details quickly. Diego would drive the herd into the stockyard, register them for auction, and collect the payment. Ilara and Rowan would watch from a distance, staying mobile, ready to intervene if things went bad. It wasn't a great plan, but it was the only one they had. Diego checked his rifle one last time, then swung into his saddle. "See you on the other side, Jeffa." "Be careful." "Always am." He rode down toward the herd, calling to them, and slowly they began to move. Ilara watched him go, her throat tight, her hands clenched into fists. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to go with him, to not let him face this alone. But she stayed where she was, watching, waiting. Rowan moved his horse closer to hers. "He'll be fine. He survived worse." "You don't know that." "No, but I know Diego. He's tough, smart, and he doesn't take unnecessary risks." "This whole thing is an unnecessary risk." "Maybe, but it's the risk you chose." Ilara turned to look at him. "Why are you really here, Rowan? And don't give me some line about disrupting Hale's operation. I want the truth." He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the town below. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost too quiet to hear. "I had a sister once, younger than me. She got caught up with the wrong people, ended up in debt to a man like Hale. Different name, different territory, but the same game. He gave her the same choice he gave you, marry him or lose everything." He paused. "She refused, so he killed her. Made it look like an accident, but I knew. I tracked him for 2 years, and when I finally found him, I put a bullet in his head." Ilara's chest ached. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was a long time ago." He looked at her. "But when I heard about you, about what Hale was doing, I saw her. Saw the same fight, the same refusal to break. And I thought maybe this time I could do something. Stop it before it ended the same way. You're trying to save me because you couldn't save her." "Something like that. That's a terrible reason." "Probably, but it's the only one I've got." They sat in silence, watching Diego and the herd grow smaller as they approached the town. Ilara felt something shift inside her, some small crack in the wall she'd built around herself. Rowan wasn't a hero, wasn't even a good man by most definitions. But he was here, and that counted for something. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, but didn't answer. An hour passed, then 2. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill, and Ilara's nerves stretched tighter with every minute. Through the spyglass, she could see Diego in the stockyard talking to men in suits, gesturing at the cattle. It looked normal, routine, but something felt wrong. "There," Rowan said suddenly, pointing. Ilara followed his gaze and saw them. 3 riders, coming from the north, moving fast. Even from this distance, she recognized the way they sat their horses. "Hale's men. They're heading for the stockyard," she said. "I see them. We need to warn Diego. No time. By the time we get down there, they'll already be on him." Rowan grabbed his rifle. "We go in shooting. We turn this into a bloodbath. Half the town dies, and Diego with them." "So what do we do?" "We trust him to handle it, and we get ready to move if he can't." It was the hardest thing Ilara had ever done, staying on that ridge while Diego faced down 3 armed men alone. She watched through the spyglass, her heart hammering, as the riders dismounted and walked toward him. Saw Diego turn, his hand dropping to his gun. Saw the lead rider, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face like carved granite, step in front of him. Words were exchanged, heated ones, judging by the body language. Then the rider pointed toward the cattle, and Diego shook his head. The rider stepped closer. Diego didn't back down. For a moment, Ilara thought it was going to end right there, in gunfire and blood. But then another man appeared, older, wearing a vest and a bowler hat, an auctioneer maybe, or a stockyard manager. He stepped between Diego and the rider, hands raised, clearly trying to defuse the situation. More words, more gestures. Then, slowly, the rider stepped back. He said something to Diego, something that made Diego's jaw tighten, but he didn't draw, didn't shoot. The 3 riders mounted up and rode out, heading south. Ilara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. What just happened? Diego talked his way out, or someone else did. Well, Rowan lowered his own spyglass. Either way, we're still in play. Another hour crawled by. The auction started, and through the spyglass, Alara could see Diego standing at the edge of the ring, watching as his cattle were sold off one by one. She couldn't hear the bids, couldn't see the prices, but she could see the auctioneer's gavel fall again and again until the last steer was gone. Diego collected an envelope from a man in a suit, shook his hand, and walked back to his horse. "He did it," Alara whispered. "He actually did it." "Now he just needs to get out of town," Rowan said, "and that's where things get tricky." They watched Diego ride out of the stockyard, heading west along the main street. He moved slowly, casually, like a man with nowhere urgent to be. But Alara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand stayed close to his gun. He made it 3 blocks before they came for him. 2 men stepped out of an alley, guns drawn. Diego reined in, his horse dancing sideways, and Alara's stomach dropped. "No," she breathed. But Diego didn't panic, didn't reach for his gun. He just sat there, hands visible, talking. One of the men gestured toward the envelope in his saddlebag, and Diego shook his head. More talking, more gestures. Then, without warning, Diego kicked his horse and bolted. The 2 men fired, but the shots went wide, and Diego was already moving, leaning low over his horse's neck, racing down the street. People scattered, shouting, and more gunfire erupted from a rooftop. "Move!" Rowan shouted, and they spurred their horses down the ridge. The ride into town was a blur. Alara's world narrowed to the horse beneath her, the gunfire ahead, the desperate need to reach Diego before it was too late. They hit the main street at a gallop, and she saw him up ahead, weaving between buildings, 3 riders on his tail. Rowan pulled his rifle and fired, and one of the riders went down. The other 2 split, one peeling off to engage Rowan, the other staying on Diego. Alara urged her mare faster, closing the distance. She could see Diego clearly now, blood on his sleeve, his horse limping. He wasn't going to make it. She raised her rifle, aimed, and fired. The rider behind Diego jerked and fell, tumbling into the dust. Diego glanced back, saw her, and changed direction, heading for the edge of town. Behind them, more shouts, more gunfire. The whole town was erupting, and Alara knew they had maybe seconds before the law showed up, before this turned into something they couldn't escape. Rowan appeared beside her, his face grim. "Go! I'll cover you." "What about you?" "I'll catch up. Go!" She didn't argue, just kicked her horse and raced after Diego. They cleared the town limits and kept going, pushing their horses until the buildings were distant specks, and the only sound was the thunder of hooves and their own ragged breathing. Finally, Diego slowed, pulling his horse to a walk. Alara came alongside him, and she could see the pain in his face, the way he held his left arm close to his body. "You're hit," she said. "Just a graze. I'm fine." "Like hell you are." He managed a weak smile. "I got the money, Jeffa. All of it. I don't care about the money. We need to get you patched up. Later. First we need to make sure Rowan gets out." They stopped and waited, scanning the horizon. Minutes passed. Then, finally, a rider appeared. Rowan, moving fast but not panicked. He pulled up beside them, his horse lathered. "We need to move. Now, town's crawling with Hale's men, and they're organizing a posse." "Where do we go?" Alara asked. Rowan looked north toward the mountains. "There's a forest up there, dense, hard to track through. If we can make it before they catch our trail, we might lose them." "Might?" "Best I can offer." Diego swayed in his saddle, and Alara grabbed his arm. "He needs a doctor. He needs to stay alive more." Rowan turned his horse. "We ride hard for 2 hours, then we stop and deal with the wound. But we can't stop here." Alara looked at Diego, at the blood soaking through his sleeve, at the pallor of his skin. Then she looked at the dust cloud rising in the distance, marking the posse's approach. "All right," she said. "Let's go." They rode north, pushing the horses as hard as they dared. The land rose steadily, the grass giving way to scrub pine and juniper, the air growing colder. Behind them, the dust cloud grew larger, closer. "They're gaining," Diego said through gritted teeth. "I know." Rowan pointed ahead. "There, see that tree line? Once we're in, they'll have a harder time following." "And if they don't give up?" "Then we keep running." They hit the tree line just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The forest swallowed them, all tall pines and thick undergrowth, the ground soft with decades of fallen needles. The horses slowed, picking their way through the tangle, and the sound of pursuit faded behind them. After an hour, Rowan called a halt. They dismounted in a small clearing, and Alara helped Diego down from his horse. He was shaking now, his face gray, and when she peeled back his sleeve, she saw the wound wasn't a graze. The bullet had gone clean through, just below his shoulder, and the bleeding hadn't stopped. "We need to cauterize it," Rowan said, pulling supplies from his pack. "No fire," Diego said. "They'll see the smoke. They'll find a corpse if we don't stop the bleeding." Alara tore strips from her shirt, wadding them against the wound. "Do it. Fast." Rowan heated his knife blade over a small, shielded flame, and when it was red hot, he pressed it against Diego's flesh. Diego bit down on a leather strap, his body going rigid, but he didn't scream. The smell of burning meat filled the clearing, and Alara had to look away. When it was done, they wrapped the wound tight and gave Diego water. He drank, his hands shaking, then leaned back against a tree. "How much money did you get?" Alara asked. He managed a weak laugh and pulled the envelope from his saddlebag. 4,800. Her heart sank. "That's not enough." "It's close." "Close doesn't pay the debt." "It's enough to negotiate, to buy time." He looked at her. "You can tell Hale you've got most of the money, that you'll get him the rest. He might go for it. And if he doesn't, then we run. All of us. Start over somewhere else." Rowan shook his head. "You won't make it 10 miles. Not with a posse on your tail and Thornwell's people still out there." "Then what do you suggest?" Alara snapped. "I suggest we find out who Thornwell is and why they want you dead. Because until we know that, you're just running in circles." "And how exactly do we do that?" Rowan pulled the contract from his pocket, studying it in the fading light. "This was written by a lawyer, professional. See the language? The formatting? Whoever Thornwell is, they've got resources, connections, which means there's a paper trail. We just need to find it." "Where?" "Red Bluff has a land office, records office. If Thornwell owns property in this territory, there'll be documentation." "We just left Red Bluff, with half the town trying to kill us." "I know, but it's the only lead we've got." Diego coughed, wincing. "You're talking about going back." "Not all of us, just me." Rowan folded the contract. "I can move quiet. Get in, find what we need, get out." "And if you get caught," Alara asked. "Then I get caught. But you'll still have the money. Still have a chance, like..." She stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm tired of running from ghosts. And because maybe, just maybe, if we figure out who Thornwell is, we can end this. For good." The forest darkened around them, shadows pooling beneath the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, and the sound sent shivers down Alara's spine. They were hunted now, truly hunted. Not just by Hale, but by forces they didn't understand, couldn't see, and the only way out was deeper into the dark. Rowan left before first light, slipping into the pre-dawn darkness without a sound. One moment he was there, checking his rifle, and the next he was gone, swallowed by the forest like he'd never existed at all. Alara stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the space where he disappeared, feeling the weight of his absence settle over them like a shroud. Diego was propped against a fallen log, his face waxy in the dim light. The fever had started sometime during the night, and now his skin was hot to the touch, his breathing shallow and uneven. Alara had given him water, changed his bandage, but she knew it wasn't enough. The wound needed proper care, a real doctor, medicine they didn't have. "How long you think he'll be gone?" Diego asked, his voice rough. "I don't know. Few hours, maybe. Depends what he finds." "And if he doesn't come back?" Alara crouched beside him, checking his forehead, still burning. "Then we figure it out ourselves." "With what? Hope and $4,800? "If that's what we've got, then yeah." Diego closed his eyes. "You're more like your father than you want to admit." "That's supposed to be an insult?" "Statement of fact. He never knew when to quit either. Quitting's what killed him. All that debt, all that pressure, his heart just gave out." She adjusted his bandage, trying to ignore the way blood was already seeping through the fresh cloth. "I'm not quitting, Diego. Not now. Not when we're this close." "Close to what? Getting killed in the woods by men we can't even see?" "Close to finishing it." He laughed, but it turned into a cough that made him wince. "You really believe that? That we can just find out who Thornwell is and suddenly everything gets better? I believe we don't have any other options. We could run, take the money, cross the state line, start fresh. With you bleeding out? We wouldn't make it 20 miles. Then I'm not leaving you. Why not? I'm dead weight now, slowing you down. You'd move faster without me. I don't care about moving faster. I care about keeping you alive. That's stupid. Probably, but I'm doing it anyway. Diego opened his eyes, studying her face. Your father used to say the same thing. About the ranch, about the land. That he didn't care if it was practical. He was holding on to it anyway. Look where that got him. He died fighting for something he believed in. That's more than most people can say. He died alone and broke, Jeffa. That's all history's going to remember. The words stung because they were true. Her father had died with nothing but debts and broken dreams. And she was walking the same path, making the same mistakes. But what else was there? Give up? Let Hale take everything? Let some faceless stranger named Thornwell erase her from the earth without even knowing why? She stood, looking out into the forest. The sun was rising now, filtering through the pine branches in long shafts of pale gold. Somewhere out there, Rowan was moving through the streets of Red Bluff, searching for answers, and somewhere else, Hale's posse was tracking them, getting closer with every hour. We need to move, she said. Find somewhere deeper in, somewhere they can't track us. I can't ride. Then I'll walk the horses and you stay in the saddle. We're not staying here. It took 20 minutes to get Diego mounted, and by the time they started moving, he was sweating and gray-faced, gripping the saddle horn like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Elara led both horses, picking a path through the dense undergrowth, following what looked like an old game trail. The forest was thick here. The trees growing so close together, their branches formed a canopy that blocked out most of the sun. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and every sound seemed amplified in the stillness. A branch snapping, a bird calling, the creak of leather, and the soft thud of hooves on needled ground. They traveled for 2 hours before Elara found what she was looking for. A narrow ravine, steep-sided and choked with brush, with a small creek running through the bottom. It was hidden, defensible, and the sound of the water would mask their presence. She helped Diego down from his horse and settled him in a sheltered spot beneath an overhang of rock. Stay here, she said. I'm going to scout the area, make sure we weren't followed. Be careful. Always am. She took her rifle and moved back the way they'd come, checking for signs of pursuit. The forest was quiet, almost unnaturally so, and that made her nervous. Animals went silent when predators were near, and right now she felt like prey in a trap. Half an hour of careful searching turned up nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, no signs that anyone had come this way. But Elara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that somewhere in the trees, eyes were tracking her movements, waiting for the right moment to strike. She made her way back to the ravine, climbing down carefully. Diego was asleep, his breathing ragged, and when she touched his forehead, the heat coming off him was worse than before. The infection was spreading, and without medicine, without help, he was going to die. Elara sat beside him, her rifle across her knees, and let herself feel the fear she'd been pushing down. They were alone, hunted, one of them wounded and fading fast, and their only hope was a man she barely knew, searching for information that might not even exist. The hours crawled by. The sun climbed to its peak and began its descent, and still Rowan didn't return. Elara changed Diego's bandage again, gave him more water, but he was barely conscious now, mumbling things that didn't make sense, names she didn't recognize, places she'd never heard of. By the time the sun touched the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire, she'd made her decision. If Rowan wasn't back by dark, she was taking Diego and heading for the nearest town. She'd find a doctor, pay whatever it took, and deal with the consequences later. Because watching him die slowly in the woods wasn't an option. She was gathering their supplies when she heard it, the soft crunch of footsteps on pine needles, moving slow, careful. Elara grabbed her rifle and pressed herself against the ravine wall, her heart hammering. The footsteps came closer, and she could make out a shape now, moving through the shadows. Tall, lean, wearing a long coat. "Rowan?" she called softly. "It's me." Relief hit her like a wave, and she lowered the rifle. He descended into the ravine, moving stiffly, and in the fading light she could see blood on his sleeve. "You're hurt," she said. "Got into a scrape on the way back. Nothing serious." He glanced at Diego. "How is he?" "Dying. The infection's spreading, and I can't stop it." Rowan knelt beside Diego, checking his pulse, his pupils. "We need to get him to a doctor. Tonight." "I know. But where? Every town within 50 miles is crawling with Hale's men. There's a mining camp north of here, maybe 10 miles. They've got a company doctor, handles accidents and sickness. He won't ask questions if we pay him enough." "Can Diego make it 10 miles?" "He'll have to." Rowan stood and pulled a folded paper from inside his coat. "Found this in the land office. Took some digging, but it was there." Alara unfolded the paper. It was a deed, old and yellowed, the ink faded but still legible. The property description matched her father's ranch, but the name on the deed wasn't Vance. It was Thornwell. Julia Thornwell. "Who is she?" Alara asked. "That's the question I couldn't answer. No other records in Red Bluff. But the date on that deed is from 18 years ago, which means she owned your land before your father did." "That doesn't make sense. My father bought that land from the territory. It was open range, unclaimed." "According to this, it wasn't. It belonged to Julia Thornwell, and somehow your father ended up with it." Alara's mind was racing. "You think he stole it? Forged the claim?" "I think there's more to this story than we know, and I think that's why someone wants you dead, because you're sitting on land that was never legally yours. But if that's true, why not just take it through the courts? Why hire a killer?" "Because maybe Julia Thornwell doesn't exist anymore. Or maybe she does, and she doesn't want anyone knowing she's connected to that land." Rowan took the deed back, refolding it carefully. "Either way, we've got a name, and names have trails. So what do we do?" "We get Diego to that mining camp, get him patched up. Then we find Julia Thornwell and ask her why she's trying to bury you." "Boy." They left immediately, rigging a makeshift travois behind one of the horses so Diego could lie down instead of riding. It was rough going, the forest floor uneven and tangled, but they made steady progress. The moon rose, nearly full, casting silver light through the trees and turning the world into a landscape of shadows and pale illumination. Diego drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally crying out when the travois hit a rock or root. Each time he did, Alara's chest tightened, and she had to resist the urge to stop, to check on him. But stopping meant slowing down, and slowing down meant he died. So she kept moving. Rowan led the way, navigating by moonlight and memory, his rifle always in hand. They didn't talk, didn't waste energy on words, just moved through the darkness like ghosts, hoping to reach the camp before Diego's luck ran out. They were 3 miles out when they saw the fire. It was distant, maybe a quarter mile off their path, but the orange glow was unmistakable. Rowan held up a hand and they stopped, listening. Voices carried through the trees, too faint to make out words, but clear enough to count. At least 6 men, maybe more. "Posse?" Alara whispered. "Probably. They must have tracked us into the forest, made camp for the night." "We need to go around." "And risk running into their scouts? They'll have men on watch, patrolling the perimeter." He studied the fire, his expression grim. "We go through." "Through? Are you insane?" "They're camped, comfortable, probably drinking, telling stories. They're not expecting us to walk right past them, which means if we're quiet, if we're careful, we can slip by before they know we were there. And if they spot us, then we run and hope Diego survives it." Alara looked back at the travois, at Diego's still form. He was barely breathing now, his skin so pale it looked gray in the moonlight. They didn't have time to go around, to add hours to a journey that was already killing him. "All right," she said, "we go through. But if this goes bad, if it goes bad, you take Diego and run. I'll hold them off. I'm not leaving you either. You might not have a choice." They approached the camp slowly, moving from tree to tree, using the shadows for cover. The voices grew louder, and Alara could make out individual words now. Laughter, cursing, the clink of bottles. Through gaps in the trees she could see them. 8 men, sitting around a large fire, their horses picketed nearby. Most of them were relaxed, their weapons leaning against trees or lying on the ground. But 2 stood apart, rifles in hand, scanning the darkness. Guards. Rowan crouched beside her. See that gap between the fire and the horses? We go through there, low and quiet. The guards are watching outward, not inward. If we time it right, we can slip past while they're looking the other way. And if they hear us, they won't. Not if you move like I showed you. He had shown her, back when they first started traveling together, how to place your feet, how to control your breathing, how to become part of the landscape. She'd thought it was paranoia at the time. Now she was grateful. They waited for the right moment. One of the guards turned away, looking north. The other was lighting a cigarette, his attention on his hands. Rowan nodded, and they moved. Alara led the horse carrying Diego's travois, her hand on its muzzle to keep it quiet. Rowan followed with the other horse, his rifle ready. They crossed through the gap, step by careful step, the fire's light casting their shadows long and distorted across the ground. 50 feet. 40. 30. One of the men by the fire stood, stretching. He turned, and for a heart-stopping moment, Alara thought he was looking right at her. But his eyes slid past, unfocused, and he walked toward the trees to relieve himself. 20 feet. 10. They were past the fire now, moving into the darkness beyond. Alara's lungs were burning from holding her breath, and her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the reins. Then Diego moaned. It wasn't loud, barely more than a whisper, but in the stillness of the forest, it might as well have been a gunshot. One of the guards turned. You hear that? The other guard frowned. Hear what? Sounded like, I don't know, something. Probably an animal. Maybe. The first guard raised his rifle, peering into the darkness. Alara froze, not daring to breathe, praying the shadows were deep enough to hide them. The guard took a step forward, then another. Rowan's hand moved to his knife, slow and deliberate. If the guard came any closer, he'd have to kill him. Quickly, quietly. Before he could raise the alarm. The guard was 10 feet away now. 5. Marcus, one of the men by the fire called. You coming back, or you planning to stand out there all night? The guard hesitated. Then he lowered his rifle. Yeah, I'm coming. He turned and walked back to the fire. Rowan exhaled slowly and motioned for Alara to keep moving. They slipped deeper into the forest, putting distance between themselves and the camp, not stopping until the firelight was just a distant glow through the trees. When they finally did stop, Alara's legs nearly gave out. She leaned against a tree, gasping, her whole body trembling. That was too close, she said. Close doesn't matter. We made it. Barely. Barely's enough. They rested for 10 minutes, checking on Diego. His breathing was worse now, rattling in his chest like stones in a tin can. Alara gave him water, but most of it just ran down his chin. He couldn't swallow anymore. We need to move faster, she said. I know. They pushed on, abandoning caution for speed. The mining camp appeared an hour later, a collection of rough buildings clustered around a pit mine, with lanterns burning in a few windows. It wasn't much, but it had walls and light, and that was enough. Rowan rode ahead, talking to a man standing guard, and whatever he said or paid must have worked because the man nodded and led them to a small building on the edge of the camp. The doctor was old, white-haired, with hands that shook from too many years underground breathing dust. But his eyes were sharp, and when he peeled back Diego's bandage, he swore softly. Should have brought him sooner. We couldn't, Alara said. Well, you're here now. Get out. I need space to work. They waited outside, standing in the cold, watching lantern light spill from the building's single window. Voices came from inside, the doctor barking orders at someone Alara couldn't see. Then silence. Then more voices. An hour passed. 2. Finally, the door opened, and the doctor stepped out, wiping blood from his hands. He'll live. But it was close. Another day and I'd be digging him a grave instead of sewing him up. Alara felt something loosen in her chest. Can we see him? He's sleeping. Needs rest more than visitors. Come back in the morning. We can't stay that long. The doctor's eyes narrowed. You in some kind of trouble? The kind that doesn't go away if we sit still. Then you're putting my camp at risk. Rowan pulled out a roll of bills, peeling off several. This cover the risk? The doctor took the money, counted it, then pocketed it. For tonight. But if they're shooting, you're on your own. Fair enough. They found a place to sleep in one of the abandoned mine shacks. Nothing but 4 walls and a dirt floor. Alara sat with her back against the wall, her rifle across her knees, while Rowan stretched out near the door. You should sleep, he said. Can't. Try anyway. We've got a long day tomorrow. What happens tomorrow? We find Julia Thornwell, and we end this. Alara closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept turning over everything that had happened, everything they'd learned, the deed, the name, the pieces that still didn't fit. Who was Julia Thornwell? Why had she owned the land, and what had her father done to take it from her? The questions chased each other in circles, and somewhere in the darkness, exhaustion finally dragged her under. She woke to Rowan shaking her shoulder. We've got company. Alara was on her feet instantly, rifle in hand. How many? Can't tell yet. But someone's asking questions. About a woman and 2 men, wounded man on a travois. Hale's men. Or worse. They grabbed their gear and moved quickly to the doctor's building. Diego was awake, sitting up, his arm in a sling. He looked better, still pale, but alert. We need to go, Alara said. Already figured that. Heard the commotion outside. The doctor appeared scowling. Told you this would happen. Where's the back way out? Rowan asked. Through the supply shed. Leads to the North Trail, but you won't get far before they spot you. We'll take our chances. They slipped out the back, moving through the supply shed and into the pre-dawn darkness. The camp was waking up now, miners heading to the pit, foremen shouting orders. In the chaos, they were just 3 more shapes moving through the shadows. They made it to the tree line before the shout went up. There, north side! Gunfire cracked through the morning air, and bullets chewed into the trees around them. Alara ran, Diego stumbling beside her, Rowan bringing up the rear and returning fire. They crashed into the forest, branches whipping at their faces, roots trying to trip them. Behind them, the shouts grew louder, closer. Split up, Rowan yelled. They can't follow all of us. No, Alara shouted back. We stay together. You'll get him killed. Then we die together. A bullet sparked off a rock beside her head, and she dove behind a fallen log, pulling Diego down with her. Rowan slid in beside them, his face grim. This is it, he said. We make a stand here or we run and they pick us off one by one. Diego checked his pistol, wincing as the movement pulled his wounded shoulder. How many? 8, maybe 10. Good. Hate having to share. Despite everything, Alara almost smiled. You can't even hold a rifle. Don't need to. I can still shoot. He looked at Rowan. You got a plan? Yeah, don't die. That's a terrible plan. It's all I've got. The first man appeared through the trees and Rowan shot him. The man went down and the others scattered, taking cover. Return fire came in ragged bursts, and Alara pressed herself flat, feeling bullets pass overhead, close enough to hear them hum. This was it. The moment everything came down to. Fight or flight, live or die. She raised her rifle, sighted on movement through the trees, and fired. The battle was chaos and noise and fear condensed into minutes that felt like hours. Alara fired until her rifle was empty, then reloaded, then fired again. Beside her, Diego and Rowan did the same, their weapons creating a wall of lead that kept the attackers at bay. But there were too many, and they were getting closer. A man broke from cover, charging their position. Rowan shot him, but another appeared, then another. They were being overrun. Then, from somewhere behind the attackers, a new sound. Gunfire. Different weapons, different rhythm. The attackers turned, confused, and someone screamed. Through the trees, Alara saw riders, a dozen of them, coming fast, firing as they rode. The attackers scattered, some returning fire, some running. The riders swept through like a storm, and in less than a minute, it was over. The attackers were dead or fleeing, and silence settled over the forest like snow. One of the riders dismounted, walking toward their position. Alara kept her rifle raised until the figure stepped into the light, and she saw his face. An old man, white beard, hard eyes, wearing a marshal's star. Alara Vance? He said. Who's asking? Marshal Cobb. I've been looking for you. Alara didn't lower her rifle. Marshal's star or not, trust was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. What do you want with me? Cobb gestured at the bodies scattered through the trees, at the smoke still hanging in the air. Right now, to keep you alive long enough to talk. Lower the weapon, Miss Vance. If I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. That's not reassuring. Wasn't meant to be. It's just fact. He turned to his men. Spread out. Make sure none of them are playing possum, and check for stragglers. The riders dispersed, moving through the carnage with practiced efficiency. Rowan slowly stood, his rifle still in hand but pointed at the ground. Diego stayed sitting, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. Cobb walked closer, his boots crunching on pine needles. He was older than Alara had first thought, maybe 60, with weathered skin and eyes that had seen too much. But there was something solid about him, something that reminded her of oak roots running deep. You mind telling me why half the territory is trying to kill you? He asked. Long story. I've got time. Alara glanced at Rowan, who shrugged. No help there. She looked back at Cobb. You know Victor Hale? Unfortunately. Man's a cancer on this territory. Been trying to pin something on him for years, but he's careful. Keeps his hands clean, uses intermediaries. Cobb spat into the dirt. What's he got to do with this? He bought my father's debts, gave me an ultimatum. Marry him or lose everything. Let me guess. You told him no. I did. And now he's trying to take what he wants by force. Cobb shook his head. Sounds like Hale. But that doesn't explain why you're running through the forest with a wounded man and a hired gun. I'm not a hired gun, Rowan said quietly. Cobb's eyes shifted to him. Rowan Creed, heard you were dead. Shot in Colorado over a card game. Rumors of my death and so forth. Clearly. Cobb turned back to Alara. You've got strange company, Miss Vance. A man like Creed doesn't attach himself to lost causes unless there's something in it for him. There isn't anything in it for him. He's helping because he wants to. And you believe that? Alara looked at Rowan, at the blood on his sleeve, at the way he'd stood between her and bullets more than once. Yeah, I do. Cobb studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. So Hale's after you. But these men weren't his. They're professional. Military discipline. I've seen their type before. They were hired by someone named Thornwell, Julia Thornwell. Something changed in Cobb's expression. A flicker of recognition, quickly hidden. Where'd you hear that name? Found a contract on a mercenary we killed, and a deed showing she owned my land 18 years ago, before my father bought it. Your father didn't buy it. He filed a claim on open range. That's what I thought. But according to that deed, it wasn't open range. It belonged to her. Cobb was quiet for a moment, his jaw working. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. You need to come with me. Now. There's things you need to know, and this forest isn't the place to say them. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me who Julia Thornwell is. Can't do that here. Too many ears, too many eyes. But I promise you, if you come with me, you'll get answers. He looked at Diego. And your friend there needs better care than a mining camp doctor can provide. I've got a place. Safe, secure, you can rest, get patched up properly, and we can talk. Alara wanted to refuse, wanted to grab Diego and Rowan and disappear into the wilderness until all of this was behind them. But Diego was barely conscious, Rowan was bleeding, and she was running on fumes in desperation. They needed help, and Cobb was offering it. If this is a trap, she started. It's not. You've got my word. Word of a lawman doesn't mean much these days. No, I suppose it doesn't. Cobb held her gaze. But it's all I can offer. That and the fact that if I wanted to hand you over to Hale, I'd have done it already. Rowan touched Alara's arm. I think we should go. You trust him? I trust that we don't have better options. She hated that he was right, hated that every choice felt like stepping deeper into a trap. But Diego needed help. And they needed answers, and Cobb was offering both. All right, she said, we'll come. But if anything feels wrong, you'll run. I know. Cobb turned to his men. Mount up, we're heading back. They rode for 3 hours, moving north through terrain that grew steadily more rugged. The trees thinned out, replaced by rocky outcroppings and steep valleys. Cobb's men rode in formation, professional and alert. And Alara noticed they watched the ridgelines more than they watched their prisoners. Because that's what they were. Prisoners. No matter how politely Cobb phrased it, Diego rode slumped in his saddle, held upright by one of Cobb's men. Every few minutes, Ilara would check on him, making sure he was still breathing. Each time, the fear that this would be the time he'd stopped grew a little stronger. By midday, they reached Cobb's place. It wasn't what Ilara expected. Not a town, not a fort, but a sprawling ranch house built into the side of a hill, with outbuildings scattered around it like mushrooms after rain. There were men here too, armed and watchful, but they didn't have the look of deputies. They looked like soldiers. "What is this place?" Ilara asked as they dismounted. "Safe house. Refuge. Call it what you want. It's where people come when the law can't protect them anymore." Cobb helped Diego down from his horse. "Get him inside. Second room on the left. There's a doctor waiting." Two men carried Diego into the house, and Ilara moved to follow, but Cobb caught her arm. "Let them work. You'll just be in the way. He's my responsibility. And right now, the best thing you can do for him is stay out of their way and let them save his life." It went against every instinct she had, but she stayed. Watched the door close. Listened to the sounds from inside. Footsteps, voices, the clatter of medical instruments. Rowan appeared beside her. "He'll be all right. That doctor knows what he's doing." "You can't promise that." "No, but I can hope. And right now, that's better than the alternative." Cobb led them to a room on the far side of the house, a simple space with a table, chairs, and a fireplace. He poured 3 glasses of whiskey and pushed 2 across the table. "Drink! You look like you need it." Ilara didn't argue. The whiskey burned going down, but it cut through the exhaustion, the fear, the bone-deep cold that had settled into her. Cobb sat across from them, his glass untouched. "I'm going to tell you a story, and when I'm done, you're going to understand why half the territory wants you dead." "I'm listening." 18 years ago, there was a woman named Julia Thornwell. She was young, educated, daughter of a railroad magnate back east. She came to Wyoming to oversee a land acquisition for her father's company. Prime territory, good water, perfect for expansion. He paused. "One of those parcels was the land your father ended up claiming. So she owned it legally." "She did, but there was a problem. The railroad company was corrupt. They were using shell companies to buy up land, then forcing the government to run rail lines through it, driving up the value. It was a scheme, and Julia found out about it, threatened to expose the whole thing." Ilara's stomach tightened. "What happened?" "They killed her, or tried to, staged an accident, made it look like her horse threw her in the mountains, left her for dead." Cobb finally took a drink. "But she survived. Barely. Spent 6 months recovering in a cabin, hidden away, while the railroad declared her dead and seized her assets, including that land. And my father? Filed his claim 2 years later. Probably had no idea the land had ever been owned before. Territory records were a mess back then. Easy to lose paperwork, easier to forge it." Cobb leaned forward. "Your father was innocent. But Julia Thornwell doesn't see it that way. She sees the land as stolen, and she spent the last 18 years trying to get it back. Why not just go through the courts? Because she's officially dead. If she resurfaces, proves who she is, the railroad company will finish what they started. And they've got more money, more power, more reach than she ever will. So she stays in the shadows, uses intermediaries, hires people like Rourke to do her dirty work." Rowan set his glass down. "So she wants the land back, but she can't claim it herself. Which means she needs Ilara dead or gone so she can buy it from Hale after he forecloses." "Exactly. Hale gets the land cheap, sells it to one of Thornwell's shell companies, and she finally gets back what was taken from her." Cobb looked at Ilara. "You're collateral damage, an obstacle between her and justice, as she sees it." Ilara's head was spinning. "Where is she now?" "That's the question I've been trying to answer for years. She moves around, never stays in one place long. But I've got sources. People who owe me favors. And one of them says she's in Cheyenne, staying at a private residence under a false name. Then we go to Cheyenne, we confront her. And say what? That you're sorry your father took her land? That won't stop her. She's been planning this for 18 years. She's not going to walk away because you ask nicely." "Then what do we do?" Cobb stood, walking to the fireplace. "There might be another way. The railroad company that tried to kill her? They're still around, still corrupt, still operating in the shadows. If we could prove they faked her death, prove she's still alive, we could force them into the open, make them the target instead of you. That's suicide. Companies like that don't get exposed. They bury the evidence and the people trying to expose them. Usually, yeah. But I've been building a case against them for years, got testimony, documents, proof of fraud and murder. What I don't have is the one thing that ties it all together. He turned to face them. Julia Thornwell, alive and willing to testify. She'll never do it. You said it yourself, they'll kill her. They'll try. But if we move fast, if we hit them before they know what's happening, we might pull it off. Might bring down the whole rotten structure. Cobb's eyes were hard. And if we do that, Julia Thornwell gets her life back, which means she doesn't need your land anymore. Doesn't need you dead. Alara looked at Rowan. What do you think? I think it's insane, dangerous, probably going to get us killed. He smiled, thin and tired. But I also think it's the only play we've got. Diego can't travel, not yet. Then he stays here, under protection. We go to Cheyenne, find Thornwell, convince her to help us take down the railroad. Cobb picked up his glass. And we do it before Hale realizes you're still alive and sends more men. The plan was madness. Alara knew that, but madness was all she had left. She'd come too far, lost too much, to turn back now. All right, she said. We go to Cheyenne, but I want to see Diego first. Make sure he's going to be okay. Fair enough, but then we leave. Tonight. The longer we wait, the more time they have to find us. Diego was awake when Alara walked into the room, his arm freshly bandaged, his color better. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and capable hands, was packing away her instruments. He'll live, she said without preamble, but he needs rest, weeks of it. No riding, no fighting, no stupidity. You hear that? Alara said to Diego. No stupidity. Too late. I already signed on with you. Despite everything, she laughed. It felt good, like remembering how to breathe. She sat on the edge of the bed. We're going to Cheyenne, going to finish this. Without me. You can't ride. Doctor's orders. I can sit a horse. No, you stay here. Get better. And when this is over, we'll come back for you. Diego's jaw tightened. And if you don't come back? Then you take that money, find your sister, and get as far from this territory as you can. Start over somewhere they've never heard of Hale or Thornwell or any of this. That's not what I want to hear. It's the best I can offer. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out, gripping her hand. Your father would be proud of you, you know that? My father got himself killed chasing dreams. And you're not chasing dreams. You're fighting for what's yours. That's different. He squeezed her hand. Be careful, Jeffa, and come back alive. I'll try. Don't try. Do it. She left before the tears could start. Rowan was waiting in the hall, and together they walked out to where Cobb had horses saddled and ready. Travel light, Cobb said. We're moving fast, and we're not stopping. The ride to Cheyenne took 2 days. They traveled hard, changing horses at way stations Cobb seemed to know by heart, sleeping in shifts, always watching the horizon for pursuit. The land changed as they moved east, the mountains giving way to rolling plains, and then to the outskirts of civilization. Cheyenne appeared on the horizon at sunset on the second day, a sprawl of buildings and railroad tracks, smoke rising from 100 chimneys. It was bigger than Alara expected, more permanent, like a city that had decided to stay instead of just passing through. Cobb led them to a boarding house on the edge of town, a nondescript building that looked like it had been there forever. The landlady was a heavy-set woman with suspicious eyes, but she took Cobb's money without questions and showed them to rooms on the second floor. Rest, Cobb said. Clean up. We move on Thornwell tomorrow at dawn. Why dawn? Rowan asked. Because that's when people are least alert, least ready for trouble, and we're bringing trouble. Alara's room was small, just a bed and a washstand, but it had a lock on the door and a window that didn't face the street. She washed the trail dust from her face and hands, changed into clothes that didn't smell like fear and gunpowder, and tried to sleep. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Rourke's body, saw the contract, saw the name written in elegant script, Julia Thornwell, a woman who'd been dead for 18 years but wasn't, A woman who'd lost everything and was willing to kill to get it back. How do you fight someone like that? Someone who'd survived being murdered, who'd lived in the shadows for nearly 2 decades, who had nothing left to lose. The answer was you didn't. You found another way. And tomorrow, that's what they'd try to do. Dawn came cold and gray, the sun hidden behind a layer of clouds that promised rain. Cobb knocked on her door at first light, his face set and determined. You ready? As ready as I'll ever be. Good, because there's no backing out now. They met Rowan in the hall, and together the three of them walked through the waking city. Cobb led them to a residential street on the north side, where large houses sat behind iron gates and manicured lawns. He stopped in front of one, a 3-story Victorian painted pale blue with white trim. This is it, he said. You sure she's here? My source is reliable. Says she's been here for 3 weeks, staying as a guest of the owner. Woman named Delacroix. Old money, old connections. The kind of person who doesn't ask questions. So how do we get in? Cobb pulled a badge from his pocket. We knock on the door and tell them we're serving a warrant. They let us in, we find Thornwell, and we have our conversation. And if she runs? She won't. She's been running for 18 years. I think part of her wants this to end. The gate was unlocked. They walked up the front path and Cobb knocked on the door. Heavy. Official. A servant answered, a young man in formal attire. Yes? Marshal Cobb, I'm here to see Julia Thornwell. The servant's face went blank. I'm sorry, there's no one here by that name. Then you won't mind if I come in and verify that. I'll need to speak with Mrs. Delacroix. You do that. We'll wait. The servant disappeared and they stood on the porch, tense and ready. Alara's hand drifted to her rifle and Rowan positioned himself where he could see both the door and the street. 5 minutes passed. Then the door opened again and a woman appeared. She was in her 60s, elegant, with silver hair piled high and a dress that cost more than Alara's entire ranch. Mrs. Delacroix. Marshal, she said coolly, I'm told you're looking for someone who doesn't exist. I'm told you're harboring a fugitive. A rather dramatic accusation. Do you have proof? I have a warrant, and I have probable cause. Now you can let us in and we can do this quietly, or I can come back with 20 men and tear this house apart. Your choice. Mrs. Delacroix's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Calculation. Very well, but I want it noted that I'm cooperating under protest. She stepped aside and they entered. The house was opulent, all polished wood and crystal chandeliers, the kind of place that made you feel poor just by walking through it. Mrs. Delacroix led them to a sitting room on the 2nd floor and gestured to a woman sitting by the window. I believe this is who you're looking for. Julia Thornwell was nothing like Alara expected. She was in her early 40s, with dark hair going gray at the temples and a face that had once been beautiful but was now marked by time and hardship. She wore simple clothes, a plain dress and shawl, and when she looked up at them, her eyes were tired but defiant. Marshal Cobb, she said, I wondered when you'd find me. Miss Thornwell, we need to talk. I have nothing to say to you, or to her. She looked at Alara, and there was something cold in her gaze. Samuel Vance's daughter, you look like him. I didn't know my father stole your land, Alara said. He didn't steal it, the railroad did. Your father just profited from their crime. Julia stood, moving to the fireplace. Do you know what it's like to lose everything? Your family, your name, your very identity? To be erased from existence while you're still breathing? No. But I know what it's like to fight for what's yours, even when the world tells you to give up. Then you understand why I can't stop. Why I won't stop. That land is mine, and I'll do whatever it takes to reclaim it. Cobb stepped forward. Even if it means killing an innocent woman, because that's what Alara is. Innocent. She didn't take your land. She didn't fake your death. She's just trying to survive in a world that's trying to bury her. Same as you. It's not the same. Isn't it? You were powerless once, hunted, desperate, and now you're doing the same thing to her that was done to you. You've become what you hated. The words landed like stones, and Julia flinched. For a moment she looked older, smaller, like the weight of 18 years was pressing down on her all at once. I have no choice, she whispered. You do. You always have. Cobb pulled out a folder, setting it on the table. I've been building a case against Western Continental Railroad. Fraud, murder, conspiracy. Everything they did to you, everything they've done since. I've got witnesses, documents, proof. But what I need is you. Alive. Willing to testify. They'll kill me. They'll try, but I can protect you. Get you into federal custody, put you in front of a judge, and bring down the whole operation. And when it's done, when they're gone, you can reclaim your name, your life, everything they took from you. Julia shook her head. You're asking me to trust the law, the same law that declared me dead and let them get away with it. I'm asking you to trust me, not the system. Me. Cobb met her eyes. And I'm asking you to stop punishing an innocent woman for crimes she didn't commit. Let Alara Vance live. Let this end. The silence stretched. Julia stared at the folder, at Cobb, at Alara. Her hands were shaking, and Alara could see the war raging inside her. 18 years of anger, of pain, of carefully laid plans colliding with the possibility of something different, something better. Finally, Julia spoke. If I do this, if I testify, what happens to the land? That's between you and Miss Vance, but I'd suggest you work it out like civilized people instead of through hired killers. Julia looked at Alara. You'd give it back? Just like that? I'd negotiate. Maybe we split it. Maybe you buy me out with the money you'll get from suing the railroad. Maybe we find some other arrangement that doesn't involve either of us dying. Alara stepped closer. I don't want your land if it means becoming like the people who took it from you. I want to build something that lasts, something clean. And I can't do that on a foundation of blood. Julia's eyes glistened, and for the first time, Alara saw not a vengeful ghost, but a woman who'd been broken and was trying desperately to put herself back together. All right, Julia said quietly. I'll testify. I'll help you bring them down. But I want it in writing, the land arrangement, signed and witnessed. I've been betrayed before. I won't be again. Fair enough, Alara said. They spent the next hour working out the details. Julia would testify. Cobb would protect her. The railroad would face justice, and the land would be split evenly between Julia and Alara, with provisions for Alara to buy out Julia's half over time if she chose. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. A beginning instead of an end. By midday, they were ready to leave. Cobb had already sent word to federal marshals, and a detail was being assembled to transport Julia to Denver for testimony. But they had one more problem. Victor Hale. He's not going to let this go, Rowan said as they prepared to leave the Delacroix house. The moment he finds out the debt's being settled, that the land's not up for grabs anymore, he's going to come for you. Let him come, Alara said. I'm done running. Brave words, but he's got an army, and we've got the law. Cobb shook his head. The law's not fast enough to stop a bullet. If Hale wants you dead, he'll make his move before I can get a warrant issued, before I can arrest him. You need to be smart about this. What do you suggest? Go back to your ranch. Make it public that the debt's being paid, that the land's yours legally. Force him into the open. Make him come at you where people can see, and then we'll have him. It was risky, but everything about this had been risky from the start. And Alara was tired of hiding, tired of running, tired of letting men like Hale dictate her life. All right, she said. We go back to the ranch, and we end this. The ride back took 3 days. They picked up Diego at Cobb's safe house, still weak but insisting he could ride, and traveled south through country that felt both familiar and strange. Alara had left her ranch weeks ago, desperate and cornered. She was returning with allies, with leverage, with a future that extended beyond the next threat. But she was also returning to face Victor Hale, and that was going to be the hardest fight yet. They reached the ranch at dusk on the 3rd day. The buildings looked smaller than she remembered, more fragile, like a strong wind could blow them over. But they were still standing, still hers. Alara dismounted and walked to the house, pushing open the door. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it. The table, the chairs, her father's coat by the door. Home. She stood there for a moment, letting the weight of it settle over her. Then she turned to the others. Tomorrow, we spread the word. Let everyone know the debt's paid, the land's secure, and we wait for Hale to make his move. And when he does? Diego asked. We fight. That night, they prepared, cleaned weapons, checked ammunition, reinforced the doors and windows. Cobb sent riders to nearby towns, spreading the word that Alara Vance had returned and was claiming her land. By morning, half the territory would know, and so would Hale. He came at noon the next day. Alara saw the dust cloud first, a dark smudge on the horizon growing steadily larger. She counted 12 riders, maybe more, moving fast and purposeful. "Here we go," Rowan said, checking his rifle one last time. They positioned themselves strategically, Alara and Rowan at the front windows. Diego, still weak but steady, at the back. Cobb and 2 of his men in the barn, ready to flank if things went bad. The riders pulled up 50 yards from the house, and Victor Hale dismounted. He looked the same as he had in his office weeks ago, tall, confident, untouchable. But there was something different in his eyes now. Anger, barely controlled rage. "Miss Vance," he called. "I believe we have unfinished business." Alara stepped out onto the porch, her rifle visible, but not aimed. "The debt's paid, Hale. You've got no claim here anymore." "Paid with what? Stolen cattle? Blood money?" "Paid legally, with a bill of sale from the Red Bluff stockyard and a signed agreement with Julia Thornwell, the real owner of this land." That got his attention. His expression flickered, confusion and calculation warring for dominance. "Julia Thornwell is dead." "She's not. She's alive, and she's testifying against Western Continental Railroad, which means all their land deals, all their schemes, all their corrupt acquisitions are about to be exposed, including the ones you were part of." Hale's face went dark. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Ask Marshal Cobb. He's right behind you." Hale turned, and there was Cobb, emerging from the barn with his men, rifles raised. "Victor Hale," Cobb said, "I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." "You can't prove anything." "Actually, I can. Julia Thornwell's testimony ties you directly to the railroad's schemes, and I've got witnesses who'll testify you hired men to intimidate and kill Miss Vance. That's enough to put you away for a long time." Hale looked around, at his men, at the rifles pointed at him, at the certainty of his empire crumbling. For the first time since Alara had met him, he looked small, defeated. "You think this changes anything?" he said, his voice low and venomous. "There'll be others. Men like me don't disappear. We just adapt." "Maybe," Alara said, "but you won't be one of them. Not anymore." Cobb's men moved in, disarming Hale's riders, putting them in chains. Hale went quietly, but the look he gave Alara as they led him away was pure poison. "This isn't over," he said. "Yeah," Alara replied. "It is." They took Hale to Cheyenne to await trial. Julia Thornwell testified, and her words brought down Western Continental Railroad like a house of cards. Executives were arrested. Assets were seized. The corruption that had poisoned the territory for decades was finally exposed to daylight. And through it all, Alara stayed on her ranch, rebuilding what had been broken, planting what had been burned. Diego recovered slowly, but he recovered. He stayed on as ranch hand and eventually as partner, helping Alara manage the land she now shared with Julia. The 2 women never became friends, exactly, but they learned to respect each other, to work together, to build something new from the ruins of what had been. Rowan stayed for a few weeks, helping with repairs, teaching Alara things about survival and strategy she'd never thought to ask. But one morning, she woke to find him gone, nothing left but a note on the kitchen table. "You don't need me anymore at Sig," it said. "And I've got ghosts to chase, so be well, Alara Vance. You earned it." She never saw him again, but sometimes, late at night, she'd think about him, wonder where he was, hope he'd found whatever he was looking for. The ranch thrived. Slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. Alara expanded the herd, repaired the fences, built new outbuildings. She hired hands, good people who needed work and a chance. And she learned that her father had been right about one thing. The land was worth fighting for. Not because it made you rich, but because it made you whole. 5 years later, she stood on her porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. The ranch spread out before her, healthy and strong. Diego was in the barn, tending to a mare about to foal. Julia had sold her half of the land back to Alara the previous year, using the money to start a new life in Denver. And Alara was here, rooted deep, finally at peace. She thought about her father sometimes, about the debts he'd left, the dreams he'd chased, the fights he'd lost. And she realized he hadn't been wrong to dream. He'd just been unlucky. Wrong time, wrong place, wrong people. But she was luckier, or maybe just more stubborn. Either way, she'd survived. She'd fought. And she'd won. Not perfectly. Not cleanly. But she'd won. And in a land where most people just tried to get by, where survival was its own victory, that was enough. Alara Vance stood on her porch, the last light fading from the sky, and for the first time in years she smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because it was hers, and no one could take that away.